Ever feel like your body didn't get the memo that you're doing everything right and still the weight won't budge? Welcome to Midlife Metabolism. In today's episode, we're pulling together the most powerful practical advice from leading doctors, dietitians, and hormone specialists, all focused on one thing: how to support healthy, sustainable weight loss in your 40s and beyond. Because let's be real, hormones shift, muscle mass drops, and what worked in your 20s, it's totally a different game now. This isn't about shame, it's about understanding what's really going on in your body and working with it, not against it. This is part 1 of a special series, so get ready for clear, compassionate, evidence-based tools to help you feel like yourself again. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've had some great questions, and one that keeps coming up, and I get asked a lot in clinic, is belly fat. That dreaded stuff that seems to become more and more of an issue as we get older. Why do we have it? What can we do about it? Even slim people seem to have an issue with belly fat as they get older. So it probably boils down a lot to do with a hormone called leptin. And leptin is something that in millennia gone by was something that stopped us starving to death and probably stopped us getting overweight. It's kind of called the hunger hormone or the satiety hormone. So what leptin's supposed to do is kind of let you know when you've had enough to eat. But something has gone wrong in the last 50 to 100 years, and suddenly we seem to be having leptin resistance. And lots of people have heard of insulin resistance, but this is another hormone that we seem to be becoming a bit resistant to. And whenever you're resistant to something like leptin, it means that your brain just isn't quite getting those messages to tell you that actually you've had enough food. And one of the theories is that people who struggle with their weight or who are overweight or obese are not responding to the leptin that they have, or there may be that they're actually producing less leptin. And why is that happening? Well, there's lots of research going on at the minute to try and understand it. What we do think is there's probably a lot to do with ultra processed foods. Sometimes people get a little bit confused as to what that means. So for example, if you chop up a potato and turn it into some chips, that and you cook them at home, that is not an ultra processed food. An ultra processed food tends to be something that comes in a packet, and it would have ingredients in it that you wouldn't necessarily be able to find in the shelf in your pantry. So it often has lots of ingredients that have long names, and you wouldn't be able to knock that product up yourself. So that's what ultra processed food is. And we do think that it's probably related to ultra processed food. But we clearly live in an environment where there's lots of ultra processed food, convenience food, and we all have supermarkets where, you know, the middle aisles or most of the aisles are full of this food. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about trying to eat your way around the edge of the supermarket, because that tends to be more where you're having those natural fruit, vegetables, meat, and things that are all in their more natural form. So what can you do to try and counteract this leptin resistance? So some of the research would suggest that high intensity exercise seems to really give a bit of a reset. So that's your sort of really high intense, or sometimes called HIIT exercise. But what we also know is that all forms of exercise actually are really, really helpful with regards to leptin. So taking some more exercise is definitely going to help. And the other things that we know that seem to impact leptin are sleep, and most importantly, not having enough sleep. And there's quite a few studies out there that show people who are getting less than the optimum amount of sleep, shift workers, etc., also have issues with leptin. So trying to get a good 7 hours, 6 to 7 hours sleep minimum a night is a really good idea. The other thing that seems to really impact leptin is fiber. So making sure you've got enough fiber in your diet, that seems to make such a big difference. And we're aiming for between 25 and 35 grams a day. And obviously it's ideal if you can take your fiber in from whole foods. So obviously vegetables are a great source, but also your pulses and nuts and other fibrous foods. But if you can't, and you just have to face reality that you just can't manage it, go and get yourself some psyllium husk or something like that to take on a regular basis, because quite frankly, it's better to have the fiber. The other thing that's really important with leptin is to actually have protein with every meal. So I think the message is definitely getting out there. People are understanding more and more that they need to have some more protein. But having protein with every meal is really important. So I think we need to think about that, particularly breakfast and lunch. Often people will skip have virtually no protein in those meals. The other thing I think is really interesting is that we know that menopause and the perimenopause, there is a connection with changes in leptin. The research industry and medical industry are trying really to understand exactly what that connection is. But we know that in the perimenopause and menopause, women start to deposit more fat into their abdomen. And look, I see this because I often send patients who are on my skin and body transformation off for a DEXA scan. And that lets me look at people's belly fat. And that's that deep fat around the organs and things that's quite unhealthy. And what's quite interesting is that even though some of the patients that I look after are actually considered to have a healthy body mass index or be within that healthy weight range, they actually have a lot of fat sitting in their tummy. And we know that that's what they call the dangerous fat and much more likely to lead to things like heart disease, etc. So there's definitely a connection between hormones in women reducing in that perimenopause, menopause, and these changes within leptin. So one of the things that obviously menopausal women will often do is take some hormones, some hormone replacement therapy, and we often see then reversal of some of those changes. So look, hopefully that helps. It's just a very, very brief reminder of things that you can do to work on that belly fat. So just to remind you, increase your fiber, have protein with every meal, have some exercise, and make sure you get 7 hours sleep every night.
I think the first thing I'd read that if we bring our physical activity levels up to the minimum guidelines, so the WHO guidelines, we can reduce our all-cause mortality by up to 30%. And that blew my mind, because there's no pill that you could find on earth that would have that great a health impact. Yet everyone's looking for shortcuts and quick fix pills or to start supplements or something. And the majority of the patients, I'm sure you see as well, but the majority of patients I'm seeing are on blood pressure medications, diabetic medications, all these things. Yet physical activity can reduce your risk of dying from anything by up to 30%. I found that insane.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely amazing. Another study I heard about recently was that they took, so your hippocampus, which for everyone listening is a part of your brain, and that sort of shrinks as you age every year. I think average 1% per year. And then they took 2 groups of people and they got one of them to do like a short burst of walking. I think it was 5 or 10 minutes per day. And then they got the other, I think they had 3 groups, but one of the groups, they just got to do some stretching. And then another group, they got to do nothing. And so you're expecting, obviously, the size of the hippocampus to shrink as you age. And it does have lots of implications for memory and functioning and spatial awareness. And the group who just did the 5 to 10 minutes of burst of fast walking once a day, actually their hippocampus grew in size by 2% in just a year. And I thought that was actually amazing. So I think, we often think about exercise as being about muscles or muscle tone or weight or healthy weight. But actually, I think what has become really to the forefront is how much exercise actually impacts your brain. And I think for a lot of people, there's a real fear of memory loss or, losing that kind of function from their brain. So I often wonder if we didn't get some more of that information out, that it actually probably the organ that benefits equally to your muscles as maybe your brain.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I think that's the area of medicine that I found people relate to the most. Um, I used to joke about it until someone said that, well, I'll tell you what I used to joke about is that no one would get out of bed in the morning and exercise to reduce their risk of diabetes. And then I met someone that said, no, that's why I exercise actually. So there's always an exception. But the majority of people don't exercise because they want to reduce their long-term cardiovascular risk or, those health metrics that we know it impacts. Whereas the majority of people want to exercise more because they feel better or they have more energy that then confers into how they are with their family or their partners. There's that mental health aspect and well-being is such a crucial part where I think the evidence is now growing and we're seeing much more data about its impact on depression, anxiety, just average sort of long-term wellness, its impact on pain. We know that exercise reduces our perception of pain and our even just our quality of life. There's studies that look at just quality of life. And I think those are the metrics that people are going to relate to a lot more than if you say, oh, well, it will reduce your risk of atherosclerosis or cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing is that whenever you are someone who is young and in your youthful period and feeling in good health, it's very hard to visualize yourself in the future. So
Yes.
again, I think just being able to understand that actually you're just putting these really good building blocks for the future. What does the evidence say for someone who maybe is 50, 60, who hasn't done a lot of exercise until this point? Is there any evidence to say that it's worthwhile, or is it just too late?
It's definitely worthwhile, just to put that there right away. The best analogy I feel with exercise as we get older, for me, is similar to like our financial health, where we will meet a lot of people, and actually it's something that we probably don't discuss that often. But there may be someone that you see that's 50 and they're looking at a life ahead of them of just working, 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 and they've never been fantastic with how they save money or putting money aside and or whatever it is. And the advice to them is it's never too late to start saving and to think about your sort of financial future. And that's the exact same message for our health. That the impact you can have now, actually, you may not think it's the case because you've got the majority of your life behind you, maybe, but actually by getting slightly more muscle mass on you, you greatly reduce your risk of falls. You're going to slow down or even stop your cognitive decline. um, I think it's the similar message to people that are still smoking into their later years. It's still worthwhile to try and stop or cut down. So, and if anything, I see the benefit of exercise in that older population so much more because they maintain their independence. And that's this thing that as soon as you start realizing that your independence disappears, you realize how much you were taking it for granted. And exercise is this fantastic way of keeping you able to look after yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people dread ending up in a nursing home and things. So it's trying to think of
Yeah.
those exercises that also improve things like balance. Like I know
Yeah.
I phoned my mum who lives in Ireland and I'm telling her that she's to stand on one leg when she's brushing her teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. Love
True.
that.
Ash, I was going to talk to you a little bit about exercise and cancer. I think a lot of people actually haven't made that connection. So I think there's obviously been a lot of publicity and advertising campaigns that have centered a lot around smoking and cancer, and then also obviously things like weight and the connection with cancer. But people haven't maybe made that connection with exercise and cancer. And I know that's something that you were very passionate about when you lived on the Central Coast. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So that's an area that I'm passionate. One, because I was asked to be involved in a fundraiser, and that sort of just spiraled into a whole big thing. And now I run an annual walking challenge to raise money for Cancer Council. But then also personally, my dad died from a brain tumor, um, and the link I have with that and exercise is he was given I think it was a sort of 90% 1 year prognosis. So the majority of people with the tumor that he had died within a year. And he survived for 4 years with a pretty good quality of life during that time. And he was one of the fittest people I knew. Used to run all the time, ex-military, very fit, and I looked up to him for that. And the reason I think it's actually really important, and this is something that it's kind of hard to show in the data, is that one of the reasons that he got his diagnosis and probably got it earlier than he may have done was because he was out running and was just drifting into bushes. So it was affecting his vision, or at least the vision processing center in his brain. And so while he was running, he thought he was running straight, but he was just sort of veering off to the left. And that's this idea that when we're pushing our level of function beyond just average daily tasks, we are much more aware of our body and we pick up on things when they're slightly not right. Whereas actually, if he was someone that was really sedentary, potted around the house, didn't do much, he probably wouldn't have recognized that he was slightly veering off to the left. And that could have taken months, if not even a year, to realize. And that's something that you see in fit people when they start to have a problem, like a cancerous tumor that's pressing on things. Actually, you detect it earlier. So that's a sort of more of a personal anecdote there. When it comes back to the evidence base, with so many different types of cancer, we know it has a positive impact. And I often talk to people about what's called the cancer continuum. And so from sort of early diagnosis right through to treatment, whether that's with radiotherapy, chemotherapy, surgery, and then through to ongoing treatments and remission and surveillance, we know that all the way along that spectrum, that continuum, exercise plays a really crucial role in reducing our risk of cancer, improving our chance of getting through surgeries, reduces our risk of side effects and all the different drug effects that are related to treatments. And then also our long-term remission, we know that it reduces that. So yeah, it's huge, the impact that it has on, and so many different types of cancer too. But I think because there's so many different mechanisms, the evidence is a little bit far behind. We know that it reduces risks and improves outcomes, but just in a sort of broad sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in terms of if you had your ideal and you could get someone to do your ideal exercise in a week, what would that look like, Ash? Let's say let's pick a couple of different groups. So let's say you have a 50-year-old female. What would your ideal be to get her to do?
Um, See, I'd be, yeah, I mean, well, minimum, we've got the WHO guidelines, which I think are a good minimum target. So that's 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity. We want to have ideally 2 strength sessions in there, which I think a lot of people overlook. And then something also in there affecting our balance and coordination. So when we put that into context, my minimum, let's aim for a bit more than that. I would love to see someone doing probably 3 sessions that are more what we see as a sort of cardio, and they could be 30 to 45 minutes. And that could be cycling, that could be brisk walking. If they enjoy running, that could be running. Or if there's someone that likes going to a studio or a gym, they could do something that's a bit more sort of continuous movement rather than strength session or resistance stuff.
As someone who went straight from pregnant to menopausal very quickly, my skin really, really deteriorated quite rapidly. Now, I'd always had a sensitive skin, but my barrier function deteriorated and I developed really very obvious rosacea. And this is something that I see day after day in my clinic also. So many of you reached out and asked what I recommend and why. I have to say that since I opened my clinic, I've been using a brand called Rationale. They're an Australian brand that have been around for about 30 years. And what I absolutely love about Rationale is the products. They feel very luxurious, but they're extremely scientifically derived. And they've got these ingredients called skin identical formulations. All the ingredients, the minerals, the vitamins, everything that's included, the proteins, the lipids have all been found naturally within the human body, and therefore they're recognized by the body. So the ingredients are really, really well received. I find that menopausal skins and perimenopausal skins are dry, irritated, and sensitive. And with this range, I'm able to create a bespoke skincare plan for my patients. If you're interested in getting some of these amazing products, head to rationale.com and use the code YOU at checkout to receive some exciting bonus samples with your order.
I know that you're very passionate around sports and exercise, and you've got some books, Guide to Thrive, Fitness After 40. So tell me, if I was your patient, what would you be telling me to do? So I'm someone, I've actually been postmenopausal since I was 34. So I've obviously, that's been a long time, but what would you be telling someone to do differently than what they've maybe been doing before? Obviously, people seem to focus a lot on aerobic exercise when they're younger and they're thinking about their weight, etc. What would you want us to do moving forward?
I think the fact that people have focused on so much cardio when they're younger is societal, not scientific, right? It's just an aftermath of the aerobics era, an aftermath of the running era, right? We were cardio for years. I was cardio for years, with very little attention being played to staying strong. So the way I approach this is to meet people where they are. It is frightening and difficult for someone who has not stepped away from the couch for any period of time, or who doesn't have physical activity as part of their daily life, whether they just never learned how, whether they've been so busy taking care of everybody else for 20 years, or whether they once were an athlete and then life takes over and they keep referring to the glory days. So even though I'm going to tell you how I want people to recompose their bodies, I recognize that nobody can jump to that. And I don't want people just to start when they're 50. I have millennial daughters. Actually, they're what comes below Gen Z? I have Gen Z daughters. I have a millennial daughter. I need them to be putting down bone and muscle. And I talk about it all the time. If they do not know it, it is not because I am not preaching to them, because that is when we build our storehouses that from which we use, right? So what do I want midlife women to do now? Number one, you must eat an anti-inflammatory diet that's focused on 1 gram of protein per ideal pound a day. And it's doable. It takes some tracking. It is achievable with whole foods as well as protein supplement, high quality protein that contains adequate leucine. So that's number one. Number two, in that anti-inflammatory diet, we are not going to eat sugar. We are not eating added sugar. We are not eating white, simple carbs. It doesn't mean we're not eating carbs. We're eating fiber carbs, so you get 30 grams of protein a day. And it just is a shift. For instance, when my family wants to eat white potatoes, I am baking a sweet potato or yam, not with sugar and molasses, but just baking it because it's so fibrous if we're going to eat that kind of starch. So protein, complex carbs, absolutely no sugar, and the rest green leafy vegetables. So there's a lot more to an anti-inflammatory diet, but those are the easy things. People can only do a few things at a time. So that's number one. Number two, we have to lift heavy. So we have to provide the proper stimulus to our muscles that they'll actually build muscle fibers. If you lift a mamby-pamby pink weight 30 times and it causes no stress to your muscles, you're not going to gain any hypertrophy. You're not going to gain any power. So heavy lifting is, and I'm trying to make it simple. There's a range, but I've made it simple for my people. 4 reps, 4 sets of the compound power lifts, which is push, pull with your arms, push, pull with your legs, 4 times 4, which means you have to go pretty heavy if you can only do it 4 times. For the accessory lifts that support a compound lift, like let's take bench press. Bench press is a compound lift. The things that support it, biceps, triceps, lats, delts, rows, 8 reps times 4 sets. And that is kind of the pattern for lifting heavy. Now, we add to that, I have added foot speed and agility to that, because It's one thing to be strong enough to hold yourself up. It's another thing to have the foot speed and agility not to trip and fall down, because we die of femur fractures, sometimes because our bones are so brittle they break and then we fall. But most of the time, we fall and then we break. So we need to build some fast twitch and agility muscles back. And there's simple exercises we do with that so that we can stand upright. So anti-inflammatory diet, lifting heavy plus speed and agility. And then number 3 is, what are we going to do about our heart, right? We need great cardiovascular health as well as power and strength. To build cardiovascular health, we need to do 3 hours a week of base training, which is basically brisk walking, or 45 minutes of brisk walking every day, which is not that long. Twice a week, we need to speed it up and do sprint intervals, because that is heavy enough work that then causes things like our mitochondria to replicate, all the good, yummy things we need to do. So sprinting is not like we're seeing in the Olympic trials right now. Don't worry. People get freaked out when I say sprinting. Sprinting is a heart rate measure, getting your heart rate up as high as it can go for 30 seconds, followed by complete recovery. So when I sprint for 30 seconds, I then turn the treadmill down, and it takes me a couple minutes to recover. And you only do that 4 times. 30 seconds times 4. So those 3 things. Then if you want to get really advanced, you layer on VO2 max training, because that's a whole different subject. But not everybody can do these things because they've stepped away from the couch for the first time. So if you eat high protein, if you walk every day, and if you do body weight exercises, you can still lose weight. You can still recompose your body. And if you do that for a couple months until you feel comfortable, then you move up to the regimen I just talked about.
I actually had a listener ask me a question to ask you about these weighted vests that you can use for exercising. So they wanted me to know what you thought of those. And she said, what's the difference between wearing a weighted vest and then being told that carrying excess weight on your own body is bad for your joints? So I thought that was just an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. Well, yes and yes. True and true, right? So we know that heavy people have less osteoporosis than skinny, fragile people. We know that, because they carry around all this extra weight. So the way to understand whether you need a weighted vest or not is to get your bone density checked, right? And if you have osteopenia and need every possible mechanism to build better bone, well, that could be an option for you. But the question is valid because we know joints bear 7 to 10 times body weight. And so when you're really heavy, that is one of the contributors to progression of arthritis. So true and true.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we've talked a little bit about osteoporosis and osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So when do you think people should have their first DEXA scan so they know where they are with their bones in an ideal world?
I do, because I call 40-ish, whether you're 35 or 45, 40-ish, the critical decade for getting your proverbial, I could swear, but I don't know you well enough, together, right? You've got to get it together. It's time to adult. It's time to have a life insurance plan. It's time to have a will. It's time to have saved enough money so you're not starving. And it's time to start caring about your health. And so just like you need your first true physical, if you haven't gotten it before, you get your mammogram. I think you need a bone density, because I have so many women showing up in my clinic in their 30s with fractures because they never laid down enough bone. Because we have had, in the United States, we've had this law called Title IX, which equalized sports participation across all educational levels. So for instance, I don't know if it exists in Australia, but if you have 50 boys playing high school sports in one school, you must have 50 girls or equal sports. So just to equalize play. Well, because of that, we have a huge generation of women who are athletes their whole lives. And sometimes athletes are amenorrhea, meaning they don't have periods for years because they live in a constant state of relative energy deficiency. And so they never lay down enough muscle. They never lay down enough bone. And so they arrive at 30 when they're supposed to have peak bone density, osteopenic. And so I think in this critical decade to get your proverbial shit together, you must get a DEXA scan, even if it's not paid for. Save your Starbucks money. Because, we can get them here. I don't know what they are in Australia. We can get them here for $99 at a gym. Some gyms have clinical DEXA scanners. And I don't buy the excuse that, insurance doesn't pay for it until you're 65. You must not need it. No, there's a difference between health prevention and disease care. At 65, you are going to be caring for disease. You're not going to be preventing disease.
And that's so interesting to me because I'm a family physician and I definitely see a lot of young female athletes and also a lot of dancers who are struggling with recurrent stress fractures and things like that. And so I know that's sort of slightly off topic, but do you think that they should be having DEXA scans?
There are many universities in the U.S. now that do DEXA scans on all incoming freshmen. And as the athletes progress. Now, do they do anything with that data? That's another question. But they do it. And the chairman of orthopedics at the University of Wisconsin her entire life's research has been on bone density in female athletes. And what her work finds is that the impact sports like gymnastics have much better bone density than the non-impact sports like swimming. And that's not surprising.
So today we are going to talk about weight loss injections, sometimes called things like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Saxenda, depends on which country you live in, what the names are. But these are really popular and lots of you have been asking me to tell you my thoughts and my top tips for using these medications. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Shauna Watts and I've been a doctor for over 25 years. I'm based in Australia, but originally trained in Northern Ireland in the UK. My specialty is general practice and I have a special interest in women's health, wellness and aesthetic medicine. So weight loss injections, they seem to give people lots of opinions out there, and whether you're pro or against, I think that they are actually a really interesting addition to the arsenal that doctors now have to help people who are struggling with being overweight or obese. So first of all, most of them are things called GLP-1 agonists, and they're basically a type of hormone which sends a message to your brain telling you that you are full before you probably have been previously, and also slow the transit through your stomach into your small intestine. So again, that you feel fuller for a lot longer. And some people will know that these have really captured the imagination of people around the world. Lots of celebrities have jumped on board and they've also been in the media for lots of good and bad reasons. So I think they're very interesting medications. I think for a lot of people, they work extremely well. However, my first tip would be that you should really only get this medication from your doctor and through an official pharmacy. I do know that some people are getting these medications or potentially substitutes for these medications in other ways, and I think that's probably quite unsafe. So my recommendation is it's definitely something you want to be upfront and honest with. Have a chat to your doctor. I find that most of us are really very on board with these medications because we can see they're really helpful. My second tip is, to be honest, is if you decide that this is something that you want to go down the route of, ignore the haters. or in fact, even your own inner critical voice. So first of all, this isn't cheating. What we know is that these medications have really changed our understanding around weight and appetite and satiety or fullness. And so stop beating yourself up. If you've struggled with your weight for a long time, and we know that carrying additional weight has lots of health implications, then it may well be really beneficial for you to lose weight. And if this can help you, well, then that's probably a good thing. We're not injecting willpower. And for years, we have felt that maybe people just needed to try a little harder or perhaps have a little bit more willpower, and then they would be able to lose weight. And I think the really interesting thing about these medications is I think that they prove that for lots of people, willpower and motivation was never really the problem, because they're losing weight now with these injections. And as I said, we're injecting a hormone, not motivation. My third tip is not to be tempted to accelerate your way through the dosing schedule. So we do move up through the doses in these medications very slowly. And I will tell you that for a lot of people, you will begin to lose weight even at really quite low doses. And if you try and skip ahead, which I know some of us are tempted to do, you may well give yourself a lot of horrible side effects. And because these medications are a once weekly dosage, your side effects may well go on for a full week. So the reality is you don't want to sort of try and race ahead. Do the schedule that your doctor has suggested. We often only change dose every 4 weeks. And even sometimes we don't need to change dose because people are already losing weight. So just be patient and just remember that it was the tortoise who won the race, not the hare. My fourth tip would be that if you are scared of needles, and I know lots of people are, first of all, the needle with these pens are tiny. And the vast majority of people will tell you that they can barely even feel the needle. So the needle is really short in length and it's also super sharp and super fine. So most people cannot feel it at all. But if you're one of those people who is super afraid of needles, maybe consider confiding in a really good family member or friend who you can tell what you're doing, and maybe they can be there with you, and maybe they could even help you with your first injection. Or what we do at our clinic is we will get one of our nurses or one of our doctors to be with you for your first injection so that you don't need to be scared. And most people, even the most frightened people of needles, are absolutely fine after their first one. My fifth tip would be that you must make this injection a part of a healthier lifestyle. So the reality is that if you keep still doing all the things that you always did before, then you're not going to lose any weight and nothing is going to change. So you have to think about this, is that this is a tool to help you and motivate you. And what a lot of patients tell me that it really does for them is it stops them thinking about food and about eating. And even though you might think that you don't think about food that much, sometimes when you use this injection, you will realize, actually I was thinking about what I was going to have for lunch next, or what snack I might have, or even thinking really negative things, thinking about what you shouldn't have, or beating yourself up about what you've just eaten. So I think that lots of people will say that it's the food noise that it really, really helps, but we have to make sure that we're changing our lifestyle as well. My next tip would be don't weigh yourself every day or even twice a day. I find some patients do that and it's a little bit disheartening. The reality is that you should probably just weigh yourself once per week and always on the same set of scales. Try and always do it at the same time. So try and do it maybe first thing in the morning, maybe when you've just hopped out of the shower, and then you can document your weight, log it on your phone in your notes, or, have a little notebook that you document it just for your own motivational purposes. And also your doctor will want to know when you have those reviews, how you're going. My next tip is that the commonest symptom is nausea, and some people also will vomit. Now, they are a minority, but if you do get those symptoms, then that can obviously be quite upsetting and distressing. Now, the good news is for most people, these symptoms do settle quite quickly, but they are completely understandable because remember that this medication is working on your stomach and your gut and your brain, and that's where all the nausea and vomiting centers and are coordinated. So, of course, it makes sense that these are the symptoms that we get. Stick to really bland foods on the days that you have this nausea. So maybe you have some toast or some cereal or something really, really without a strong flavor so that you're not perpetuating that nausea, and perhaps maybe convince your partner to do that cooking for a few days so that you can take a break away from those smells. The other thing I really advocate my patients do is to journal. So I know that journaling is very trendy, but it's also extremely evidence-based. So there's really good scientific evidence that if you journal, then it makes actually quite a significant difference to your behavior. And certainly within all my programs, I always gift all of my patients a journal because I want them to journal what they're eating, how they're feeling, how much water they're drinking. And there's really, really good evidence that even if you journal whenever you have a slip up, or let's say you eat a chocolate bar or you have a bottle of wine, that even by the act of writing that down, it actually makes your brain make better choices for the next few days. So even if you make a mistake, we want you to write that down as well. My next tip is that I want you to make sure that you incorporate strength and weight training. So we've all read the headlines and seen everyone talking on social media that you get lots of weight, muscle loss or sarcopenia with these injections. Now, what I want to clarify is that if you lose weight in any capacity, whether it's through a Weight Watchers program or healthy eating or for whatever reason, and particularly if you lose weight rapidly, you will always lose muscle. So this is not something that is just with these injections. It's actually with any type of weight loss. So first of all, I want to just point that out, that you will lose muscle as well, no matter what way you lose weight. But what's really important is that you're incorporating some kind of weight and strengthening program so that as you're perhaps losing some muscle, you can be building some new muscle in return. Because obviously what we really want you to lose is that fat tissue, and we want as much as possible to try and preserve muscle. So I know that one of the great things about these injections is people often feel that they can move a bit easier. Maybe their muscles and joints aren't quite as tired because they're not carrying as much weight. And then now is the time to really get on board and getting perhaps a personal trainer, joining a local gym, or in fact, there are lots of good online resources that will give you some simple regimes to start putting some weight through your body to get some muscle being built. And then my last tip for you is that constipation can unfortunately be a problem again because of this gut effect. And I think it's probably worthwhile at the beginning of your journey, at least, of taking a daily laxative. There's nothing worse than feeling nauseated and feeling constipated. And then you begin to wonder, why on earth have you put yourself through this? So take a gentle laxatives, stop you getting a sore tummy, stop you having that horrible bloated feeling. And as long as it's something really nice and gentle, it's not going to have any side effects or long-term implications. It's just going to keep everything moving through the gut nice and gently so that hopefully you don't end up with that horrible feeling of severe constipation. So I'm really hoping that those tips help you stay on track. I know a lot of you out there are using these medications or thinking of using these medications. And as I said, I think they're a fantastic tool as long as they're incorporated alongside the healthy lifestyle, that you're well supported by your doctor, and that you're taking it one step at a time. So if you're using these medications, I'm wishing you all the best of luck. I'd love to know how you're going in the comments below. And if you have any questions, let me know.
So obviously I talk a lot to my perimenopausal and postmenopausal women about protein and getting enough in the diet. Can you give me a couple of tips and hints? Because a lot of women go, yeah, I know about the protein. I'm working hard with the protein, but actually in real life, people don't really know how much is more protein and what should they be aiming for, like in real terms. And I also think sometimes whenever we talk in grams or that's very tricky for people to visualize. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of simplify it down into, is it one pork chop or what is it that you're thinking?
There might be differing needs depending on the individuals, but I guess as not a random guide, a general guide, what I usually do with my clients is talk about how we would form a balanced meal or a balanced plate. And so the components of that would be around a quarter of the plate is our protein, about half of our plate are our plants, vegetables, salads, or perhaps even fruits if we're talking breakfast. And then a quarter of our plate will be our whole grains. And so people tend to sort of find that a little bit easier with lunches and dinners. So I'll just sort of mention breakfast first, because this is typically the area where women tend not to get enough protein in, because our typical breakfast foods, like a bowl of cereal or some toast, is generally going to be a good source of our carbohydrates and some fiber, but we're missing the protein. So in terms of breakfast options, which are sometimes a little bit harder, eggs are an obvious one, but a lot of people don't necessarily feel like they've got the time to be cooking that up in the morning. So, this is where I might use something like a little bit of protein powder. I don't have my clients chugging protein shakes 24/7, but we might use a little bit of protein powder to enhance, some porridge or some overnight oats. We might use high protein yogurt or baked beans or cottage cheese in terms of helping to increase. So for breakfast, I would just sort of be more focused on getting in a source of protein for starters. So I know we weren't talking grams, but generally sort of 20 to 30 grams is the minimum amount of protein that we'd be looking for in a meal. So in terms of sort of getting that, that's roughly going to be sort of a hand size. If we're having sort of meat or chicken or fish, it's roughly sort of a bit bigger than our palm, probably closer to a hand size. And they're the types of portions that we'd be looking for.
Yeah, no, that's great. And in terms of using like nuts and seeds as well?
Yeah, so it's really difficult because we eat foods, we don't eat nutrients. And so, most foods are a combination of nutrients. So nuts and seeds, have a source of protein. They're also a source of healthy fats. For me, with my clients, when we're looking to lose weight, is that I would tend to count things like our nuts and seeds more as our healthy fat component. There is a sort of fine line between healthy eating and eating for fat loss. And so being mindful of portions of nuts and seeds, if we are looking for weight loss, is something that we look at, but absolutely really important to include those things. So for the purposes of my clients who are mostly looking to lose weight, I would usually sort of think about our nuts and seeds as our fats and flavors. So an important part of the meal, but not the bulk in terms of where we get our protein from.
Okay. And you mentioned protein powder. Can I ask you what your thoughts are on whey-based protein powder?
People consume sort of dairy-based products. Just a whey protein isolate is usually what I recommend. There's a big difference between sort of a good quality protein powder that has minimal ingredients versus some of the things on the market with lots of fillers, lots of flavors. You can get, birthday cake flavored protein powders that have got lots of stuff in them. So usually for my clients, I'd be recommending something really plain. I usually recommend the raw or unflavored options because often sort of, for many of the whey proteins, the only ingredient is the whey protein versus extra fillers and sweeteners. So yeah, if people are happy to consume dairy, then a whey protein isolate. Otherwise, there's some plant-based alternatives as well.
The only thing that I sometimes see with whey protein is I think it can definitely make some people's skin worse. So if people are having skin issues, I would tend to steer away from that. You mentioned earlier inflammatory foods. What do you mean by that?
Talk about things in terms of anti-inflammatory eating patterns. So rather than sort of demonizing, individual foods, we talk about patterns in general. So for most of us, we want to be following anti-inflammatory eating patterns, but also that's extra important for women going through that menopausal transition. So this is sort of where I guess the Mediterranean diet has come into popularity over the years as well, because that sort of style of eating promotes sort of anti-inflammatory principles. So that would be minimizing, I guess, our intake of our discretionary foods, so foods that don't sort of look too much like their original ingredients. So these are things that we would sort of commonly label junk foods, so minimizing our intake of our discretionary foods and really maximizing our intake of whole foods, so our fruits and vegetables, whole grains as well, nuts and seeds and healthy fats. Things like our oily fish as well can be really important. So I guess, when we think about eating patterns, we don't necessarily need to demonize foods, or same again, we don't need to put health halos on specific foods. It's about our patterns overall and having a look at what we're doing overall versus sort of worrying too much about each food that we may or may not be eating.
One of the other questions that people seem to be quite puzzled about is oil. Which type of oil to use to cook their food, to use coconut oil or not. And it seems like every time you walk through the supermarket, that oil area of the supermarket just seems to be getting bigger and bigger with more and more oils. And it can become a little bit sort of confusing, and people can end up with a bit of analysis paralysis. Obviously, I know that extra virgin olive oil is often sort of trumped as being the healthiest. What are your thoughts on various oils? Which ones would you recommend?
Great question. And anybody who's been online looking at nutrition things will know that it's a very controversial space in terms of people with different arguments. I'm generally in the extra virgin olive oil camp, in the sense that it's made up of a good fat profile. Good quality extra virgin olive oil is rich in sort of its antioxidants and polyphenols. And what that does and what that means is it's a very stable oil. So for a little while, there was a bit of debate as to whether or not extra virgin olive oil was a good oil to cook with. The smoke point is reasonably high, but because of that antioxidant and polyphenol content, it actually makes it reasonably stable. So as far as a versatile oil goes, for most cooking, salad dressings, those sorts of things, extra virgin olive oil will always be my pick. I wish I'd sort of bought shares in coconut products, a decade ago, because I think they've been marketed extremely well. I don't think that they're sort of terrible. I don't think that they're the magical products that people are, often sort of market them as. So, yes, for other things, it comes down to the taste profile and the type of thing that you're making that I think will dictate the type of oil that you choose. But first and foremost, I generally recommend an extra virgin olive oil as your main household oil.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And so I'm an Irish girl, as you can tell. We like a potato in Ireland. The great debate is to potato or not to potato. I love potatoes. Are potatoes good for you or not?
Yes, they are. I feel like the poor potato, its reputation has really taken a beating. So when I'm talking about a potato, I am talking about a potato, preferably in its jacket. I'm not talking about a deep fried chip potato that you get at the pub. But in terms of a jacket potato, it's a really great source of fiber and lots of other nutrients as well. There's also what they call sort of like a satiating index, where they have a look at different foods and actually how filling and how satiating they are. And potato ranks really, really highly. And so this is what happens that I see really commonly is when people are trying to lose weight, they end up creating these very light meals. So they take the potato off the plate. We've got, maybe some chicken and some broccoli there, and it's really light, or a salad, tuna salad with some, tuna and lettuce. And what we find is that, they're not satiated, they're not filling up. So then they'll end up being hungry. They'll need to snack later. So my preference is to build really filling and satisfying meals. And a potato is a really great source of that sort of carbohydrate and fuel, and also something that's going to be really satiating. Another argument in the potato camp is that we know that cooked and cooled starches, resistant starches, are very good for us in terms of our gut health. So this is something like a potato salad. We cook it and cool it. It's a really good source of the resistant starches, which is great for our gut. So I'm definitely team potato.
Okay, so potato salad, good, tick. Baked potato, good, tick. French fries, as we all know, probably not so healthy, maybe occasionally kind of thing. In terms of things like pasta, so I do feel like a lot of women of my vintage often feel like they can't have pasta, they can't have bread, they can't have potatoes because they're trying to manage their weight. Is that similar to potato, or what are your thoughts on those ingredients?
Absolutely. And I guess I should also preface this by saying that people will have different needs, different allergies and tolerances, other things. But just sort of speaking generally, certainly we don't need to cut out these sorts of foods in order to lose weight. What we do know is that particularly females, as we get a little bit older and our hormones start to shift and change, that our ability to utilize our carb fuels is blunted a little bit. So we do need to moderate our intake, but we don't actually need to cut it out. So helping my clients sort of understand portions and how they can work these foods into their days and into their weeks is something that I do. There is, I guess, a little bit of reasoning that we would want to be eating these foods perhaps a bit earlier in the day when we are a little bit more metabolically active. So, breakfast and lunches versus kind of having a really, really heavy dinner. But then, there's also what's perfect versus what's practical in terms of our lifestyles as well. So it does come down to moderating and portion size versus needing to cut out. Actually, in terms of the research around weight management, what that shows is that, as long as our calories and protein are where they need to be, our carbs and fats can actually fall where they fall. This comes down to personal preference. So, keto is not necessarily superior to a different style of weight loss diet. It's about finding the right pattern and style that works for you.
I am sorry, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit now about specific foods that lots of women seem to talk a lot about. So bread. Everyone seems to be a little bit confused about bread, whether bread's good for you. Should they only be having sourdough bread or bread brought from a bakery, not the supermarket? And I know that you're always very good about saying everything in moderation, but where are we with the whole bread scenario?
Same as sort of potatoes and pasta in the sense that it can be a really good we can get a really good source of whole grains and fiber from a good quality bread. So usually sort of a bread that's based around wholemeal and whole grains would be my preference. There's great breads at bakeries, but we've also got some really great supermarket breads as well. So, expense is not necessarily equate to quality. As long as we're looking for wholemeal flours and whole grains where we can, there's a lot of great supermarket brands and other brands as well. Comes down to quantities and comes down to sort of pairing it, making sure that we are, again, sort of with carbs, we want carbs to have friends with them. So making sure that we've got some protein and some plants coming in as well. But, a good old sandwich, like they've really gone out of favor, but having a sandwich with some protein and a big whack of salad can be a really satisfying lunch, meaning again that's going to reflect well in terms of our snacking and our sort of satiation later in the day. So yeah, I do think bread's probably been a little bit demonized with the potato, but if we're using good quality and in the right proportions, then I would think it can be an asset to our diet.
I've noticed recently there's breads with added protein. Is that a gimmicky thing, or are they a reasonable purchase?
So, protein's obviously in fashion at the moment because you'll see that everything in the supermarket is now got added protein. There's certain situations where I would use those types of products, like the higher protein breads. So an example might be, if somebody's running out the door and they just want a bit of toast and Vegemite in the morning, using a protein bread can be really helpful because it at least sort of then starts you off the day with some protein. The other time I might use it is if you've got sort of a soup that might be more of a veggie base. Having a slice of protein toast on the side can be a really helpful way just to boost up the protein in the meal. I'm not going to pretend that they taste like yummy fresh bread because the texture is actually different. So good for toast, not so good for sandwiches. There's a couple of, as I said, there's a couple of circumstances where these sorts of products can be really helpful.
Cheese. What do you think about cheese? lots of women tell me that they give up their husband but not give up cheese. So what are your thoughts on cheese? How much cheese is too much cheese?
I think 10 years ago, I probably would have been a bit tighter around cheese, but I think also, and again, this comes down to individual tolerances as well, but assuming that you can tolerate cheese and tolerate dairy, then again, I think it can be an asset. I would usually sort of put cheese more in our fats and flavors category versus a source of protein. Probably cottage cheese is the exception to that. So I definitely think that cheese can be a really something that can add flavor to foods and also add a little bit of fats and protein as well. So again, I'm pro cheese.
What is it about cottage cheese? I can remember even as a child in the 1980s in Ireland, my mother being on a diet and having cottage cheese. It looked revolting to me, and I have to admit I've never willingly ate it. But what is it about cottage cheese that's so great?
It's also protein, and I guess it's a non-meat option as well. So for people who aren't eating meats then and are eating dairy, then cottage cheese can be a lean source of protein. It's also pretty versatile. Again, I was grossed out by it for so many years because just that texture. But now that I've eaten it as an adult, I'm like, actually, it's pretty good. It's really versatile. So things that my clients might do in terms of savory versions, they could mash it with avo so that then they've got cottage cheese and avo on toast. That's a nice high protein meal. It can also go sweet as well. So sometimes people might put a little bit of honey and cinnamon and have it with berries or berries on toast and those sorts of things. So it's reasonably cheap, pretty versatile, and a really good source of protein and a nice easy one for either meals or snacks.
And I'm sorry, I know I'm just picking your brain here constantly, but sugar and versus artificial sweeteners. I feel like artificial sweeteners definitely went out of fashion, maybe, I don't know, a while ago, and they seem to have come back in a little bit again, and that zone again in the supermarket seems to be ever increasing, and it does feel a little bit confusing.
Really good point. And I think again there's a lot of sort of misinformation traveling around, so we know we do need to minimize or reduce our added sugars. In terms of artificial sweeteners, so I tend to sit on the fence in terms of it comes down to the amount that you're consuming. So for all of my clients, they might want the odd diet soft drink or Coke Zero every now and again, and for me I would say that that's absolutely fine. So the general consensus is that artificial sweeteners are safe within sort of small to moderate consumption. So in terms of what I advise my clients to do, it probably just depends on the person and the situation.
Well, I know that myself and some of the girls I work with went through a bit of a phase there, and we were having a little bit too much Diet Coke. And then I did read quite an interesting clinical study, which did seem to show that despite not having any sugar in it, diet drinks can really influence your insulin and absorption really for hours and hours after you've actually consumed the drink. So I think they're perhaps not just quite as calorie neutral as we would be led to believe.
There's also, that there'll be more research to come, particularly on the impact around the gut microbiome as well, which is something to consider. So yeah, I think they're not the magic substance that we probably thought they were maybe in the 80s and the 90s. But again, it comes down to creating sort of a balance overall. And so I don't stress too much if there's an odd Diet Coke coming in, but I guess it can be common, I guess, from a weight management perspective that people might use these products more as an appetite suppressant and can affect sort of the other nutrition that we're consuming. So for sure, it's not something that I would recommend in big quantities.
Yeah, I definitely had a patient recently and she was having 6 Diet Cokes a day and then really not having any food. So yeah, that was challenging, and she kind of felt that it was actually quite addictive. She was struggling to give up the. You're nodding. You've had people like that as well. Do you have any patient stories that you can share with us that might sort of give some of our listeners a little bit of inspiration or direction as to where to go on their own journey?
generally. So something that people don't or might not realize is that, as an accredited dietitian, I'm sort of required to operate under certain guidelines. And so one of those things is that I can't necessarily share clinical outcomes like this patient lost this amount of weight and their cholesterol improved by this much. But I can talk about sort of general experiences and things that people have had. Probably one client that sticks in my mind quite a lot, we'll call her Sue. So Sue, I think, was late 50s, and again had been there, done that in terms of her diet. Probably her most recent had been shakes. She'd also been on Ozempic and had lost about 10 kilos, but then had difficulties with supply issues and regained that weight. And she was feeling pretty sort of flat about everything. She was a little bit skeptical, I guess, sort of starting to work with me because it was like, well, how is this going to be different to everything else that I've done? So we just got really, really simple changes in terms of, we've talked about sort of the plate and portioning her plate. So it wasn't about changing the types of foods that she was cooking, but just changing the proportions that were on the plate. We talked about sort of snacks on the go. She was often babysitting her grandkids and was in and out, and so would often just be eating whatever was around. So more of a sort of victim of her environment and circumstances versus being planned and prepared. And purely just by those things, we actually made some really big inroads for her in terms of our progress, and she was feeling better. The other thing that I often do with my clients, and we did with this particular client, is thinking about her week as a whole, because what she was doing, again, was that sort of perfectionist mindset. She was trying to get every day perfect. And then when she would go out for dinner, she couldn't enjoy her meal because she'd be sitting there going, oh, like I've stuffed it now. She was feeling guilty before she'd even finished the meal, and was really struggling to enjoy her social occasions. So learning how to think about her week as a whole and balancing her week was a really sort of positive mind shift for her, because it meant that it didn't mean that every little decision she made every day was life or death, that she could figure out how to balance her week. And for her, sort of, this is why she sticks in my head, is that she sort of said, I don't feel like I'm on a diet at all. This is easy. It's not a big deal. And for her in the past, it had always felt like dieting was, climbing that mountain, and it was this big slog. And so that transformation from having that sort of slog and trying to be perfect and that constant sort of guilt cycle, to something that sort of almost felt too easy, that she felt like she was cheating, that it felt good, and that was a massive shift for her. And so I think it's just remembering that you can create habits and lifestyles that feel good. It doesn't have to be that mammoth uphill slog, and that there is room for meals out and enjoying social occasions, and understanding that consistency sort of trumps intensity or perfection.
As you said, like the patient you're talking about, lots of people struggle with snacks. They're running around, they've maybe been really busy, they've left work, they're now picking someone up from school and taking them to ballet or whatever. And there's just this endless round of running around, and it's trying to have snacks maybe in your car or in your handbag that are going to be reasonable. Do you have any little hints or tips of good snacks? Like I sometimes say things like, a handful of almonds, or sometimes like dried apricots, because a lot of my patients are iron deficient and things like that. But have you any other little hints and tips of things that you think are handy to carry around?
Yeah, I think, this is where sort of that having some plan B options are really important. So being a dietitian, I'm always going to be telling people to eat their fruit and some veggie sticks and, maybe a yogurt. But in reality, sometimes you need some of those portable snacks that are going to be able to sit in your car or your handbag, and, making life easy. So nuts are a really great one in terms of providing sort of high level of nutrients. There are some reasonable sort of nut bars and things on the market. There's a Carmen's almond bar that my clients sort of often will use. Cheese and bickies, or even like little Baby Bell cheeses, can be really helpful in the sense that they can survive sort of being out of the fridge for a little bit and don't go sort of yuck.
That's all right. It's tricky. It's always nice to think that you're going to chop up all these veggies and have your little tub with your hummus and your capsicum and
celery, but then, you know, I find it in my handbag 2 days later going, oh, I completely forgot to eat that.
That was good.
That was great. I'm really glad that I did that. And then I just pop it in the bin. Okay. And I promise you, this is my last question. Non-dairy milks, those are obviously, again, have absolutely exploded. I have to admit, we've been drinking oat milk in our family for 15 years because of some allergies with my children. So it was long before it was popular. In fact, it was very hard to get at that stage. But what are your thoughts on those milks? Because it does seem to be that every time I go to the supermarket again, that area is expanded. I think supermarkets are going to end up the size of aircraft hangars with all these expansion in ingredients that we're seeing. But is there any of those non-dairy milks that you think are better than others in terms of nutritional value?
Jen, I would say that, with nutrition, the answer to every question is it depends. So, I just want to firstly say that, with cow's milk, animal milk, like if you tolerate that and that works well for you, like you don't have to swap to a plant milk. I think that's sort of also people have been thinking, should I be swapping to a plant milk? It comes down to your individual circumstances and preferences. So in terms of some of probably I would say, I guess almond milk and oat milk are probably the two really common varieties, as well as perhaps soy milk. If I had to choose in terms of a favorite plant milk, I'd probably go soy just because it's a nutritional profile. It's got that good source of protein in it, which is similar to cow's milk. One thing that I would say is that we definitely need to be having a look at milks that have been calcium fortified. Certainly bone health is something that we need to be mindful of. And a lot of the plant milks aren't fortified with calcium. So we kind of think that it's a direct swap and that we're getting our serve of dairy alternatives, but a lot of them aren't fortified. So you just need to double check the back of your pack to make sure that you're getting a fortified option. Something like an almond milk, is really low calorie. So it's very popular in the weight loss world, but again, might not be fortified with calcium, and it's also very low in protein. So, something like a cow's milk or a soy milk sort of comes with some protein inbuilt. Almond milk, lower calorie, but no protein. So there's lots of kind of different things to consider. But one thing that I would say is, yes, definitely be mindful of the calcium.
And oat milk, is there protein in oat milk?
No. So oat milk sort of sits in the middle in that sense, that it's sort of, it's not as low calorie as something like an almond milk. And there's not much protein in oat milk.
Okay, amazing. Okay, well, I think I've probably exhausted you asking a million questions. Is there anything that you feel that you would love to share that I haven't picked your brain about yet?
The message that I want to get out to people in the world is that, I think it is important that we look after ourselves. And in the end, this is about sort of making ourselves feel great and being able to lead the lives that we want to lead, and that you don't necessarily need to get to a certain number on the scale to do that. So think about what you want your body to do rather than what you want your body to weigh. And always motivate through kindness and compassion rather than that self-criticism, because that completely changes the journey for people.
This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or other professional advice. Information is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you have any health concerns, always consult your doctor.